All right, people are starting to trickle into the webinar. Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it a few minutes for people to log in. We're about 80 people who signed up, so just wait a few minutes. If you want to tell us which brewery you're at and what you're drinking, talk about it in the chat. Yeah, we're about halfway there. It's about 35 people. This is kind of fun. It's like watching little numbers go up. Grab yourselves a beer while you're getting ready. We're all settled in with a nice can of Frisch.
It's like a weird telethon thing.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
We're raising money for needy brewery supply companies.
Needy brewers.
Needy brewers that need to shave.
Someone didn't receive a beer. Oh, fuck.
All right, well, we're a minute in. We've got people. We've got some people from Kelowna, Michelle, and we've got Tyler from White Cell Brewing in Nanaimo, and Daniel Lowing saying, no one asked me for my address. And all right, we'll get started. Some folks in Vancouver, so lots of people from the West Coast. There we go. Some brewers in Quebec from Snow. Storm from Newfoundland. We're now officially coast to coast. Hey, Christy. All right, let's get started. So welcome to the Brew Culture webinar about Frisch. I'm Stefan. I'm going to be the host for this. I'm the technical sales rep for Brew Culture, and I'm joined here today by my friend Matt Tweedy from Tooth and Nail. He is the brewmaster and product development dude down there. And Ryan Morrow, who is the co-founder and brewing director at Collective Arts. Hi guys, how you doing?
Close enough.
All right, you want to correct me there? Sorry.
Matt's the co-founder and I'm the brewmaster.
Awesome. Okay, so I flipped the two. Sorry, guys. So it's my first time around. This is Brew Culture's first webinar hosting. Our goal here is really to educate brewers, bring brewers together and chat about something cool in the industry and get people's involvements and questions. So we've got the Q&A section open and we've got the chat open. So if you have questions, throw them in there. We're going to have a conversation. If I can find a nook for one of the questions, I will throw it to the two brewers. And otherwise, we'll have that session at the end once we're done talking. So we're all here to talk about Frisch. So if you were one of the few who registered early on, you have a can of this and you should be drinking it if you haven't already done so. That's what we're all doing here. And we're going to talk about this collaboration that was brewed with WetHops, which is a new product from Germany that, as the name implies, allows brewers to utilize the WetHop flavors from fresh off the vine hops. So before we jump into the collaboration and the brewing experience that happened, I wanted to touch base on a little bit of wet hop ales and what that actually means. And if I dare say, call it a style. So when I heard about this project, I was pretty excited. I was like, whoa, cool. Germany, wet hops. There must be some really cool, obscure beer style that's traditional from out there that they're trying to bring to life, in a new vein. And after talking to some brewers out there, that really was not the case at all, which surprised me, but also made me really happy. So this product was really developed in a way for German hops to be able to be showcased in their prime of like vine flavors and to participate in the innovation that's happening in the North American craft scene. So basically, when you start digging into wet hop ales, like they must have been done historically. Like there's no doubt about that before they started drying hops. But when we talk about that today, what we're talking about is the modern interpretation that the West Coast of the US started developing in the mid 90s. And, this is probably an arguable statement, but Sierra Nevada was one of the first ones that did it back in 1996 with a harvest ale. And they did an effort of, getting some hops from Yakima Valley, driving them down as fast as they could and throwing them in the kettle in their brew house. And then, people replicated this and tried to innovate and develop new flavors. And what's interesting about it is we're doing it because of that, unique flavor that you can't get anywhere else. So all our hops are dried and pelletized. They lose a lot of their essential oils when we go through that, and they're processed. So being able to get them off the vine like this allows us to utilize some unique flavors that are otherwise lost through the shelf stabilizing process. And this is kind of interesting because, there's the whole other challenge of that wet hop brew cycle, which if anybody has brewed a wet hops with, fresh hops from the vine, that you're dealing with 2 to 4 times the volume in hops and just vegetal matter, which means, a lot of difficulties in your brewing process because it's not really designed for that. And then there's the logistic component of being able to actually do this and having a farm nearby and the time and space in your brewery to actually do it. So there's a lot of challenges, which is probably why this is not a more widespread beer style. And this wet hop product that we're going to talk about today kind of solves 2 of those big challenges, which is capturing that unique flavor and making it shelf stable over a prolonged period of time and allowing brewers to use it year round so that it can be integrated into different beers and some core brands as well. So let's dive into this. My first question for Matt and Ryan is, have you guys brewed with fresh hops from the vine, and how does that compare to using this wet hop product?
I'm going to let Ryan take this because I have not.
Yeah, I've done it a few times. Probably at least I've been doing it seasonally for like the last 8 to 10 years, I think, in Ontario using Ontario grown hops. So I'm pretty used to using freshly harvested hops from locally grown farms. I have talked to people about U.S. grown hops and like the logistics of trying to get them across the border in a timely manner to use them in Ontario. Seems a little daunting, but yeah, I'm pretty versed at using local wet hops. And I know kind of usage rates that work for me for the beers that I've been making.
So this new wet hop product, basically what the Germans did is they found they're taking the hops fresh off the vine, they're putting them in a foil bag, they're getting rid of all the oxygen in the bag and sealing it up in a vacuum seal. And then they're putting this bag through 2 processes, one that allows the hops inside the bag to be shredded, and then 2, a heat stabilizing step, which gives it shelf stability for somewhere up to 1.5 years. So Ryan, you're talking about utilization and dosing rates. When you used this wet hop product, did you find that it had similar usage rates that you would typically see in undried fresh hops?
Yeah, so I mean, like a little bit of backstory is this is the second year we've made this iteration of this beer. First year was at Tooth and Nail last year, and then this year was at Collective. And we kind of, the first year we weren't totally sure how to use the hops and what would happen. So long story short, the hops definitely, if you assume you're gonna get a bit better because the quality of them seems so fresh and vibrant, but they do act quite a lot like a real wet hop in terms of the amount of character that shines through in the final product. So you do end up using a higher usage rate like you would think you would use in a wet hop. But you still have the benefit of the shelf stability and the year-round factor.
It's also not apples and apples either. You've got, if you're using wet hops from the vine, you've got a mass, like a huge mass of hops. You have a known weight. You probably don't necessarily have known alphas and whatnot. Whereas with the wet hop product, I mean, everything's been run through a hammer mill. So it's really, really condensed. And so it's deceiving. You probably are getting away with using less, but it's very easy to equate it with pellets just by looking at it, and it's not the same. You need to use more for sure. And they're extremely aromatic, and the oils flash off very, very quickly. You need to get them into the kettle very fast. So whereas pellets, like I might even, open them up an hour before I use them, let them breathe and whatever. You don't do that with wet hop.
A little deceiving, you're right, because they're so aromatic. You're like, oh wow, are these going to be like pellets? But they really more carry over like a wet hop, like a full cone. So
yeah, we are talking about a product that's like 80% moisture because it never really went through any drying process. And with that said, the drying process typically loses about 30% of the essential oils that you would find. So you also gain those in this product. But like you're saying, it's very aromatic. So Matt, why don't you talk to us about the first iteration of Frisch, how you guys approached a recipe, and then we'll hear about how Ryan built off of that for the second recipe.
Yeah, well, for the first recipe, I mean, we knew that we wanted a very fairly neutral malt base. We just chose a German Pale Ale malt, fairly neutral yeast. We chose, Kolsch yeast or whatever the brand was of that particular yeast. And then we really kind of wanted to allow the wet hop to shine, but it was very challenging because we didn't really know what we were dealing with. When you get wet hop, there are two sets of alpha acids you have to deal with, because you've got the alpha acid of the hop itself, which is extremely low because it has not concentrated like you would in a pellet, but also due to the pasteurization process that the wet hop goes through, it pre-isomerizes some of those alpha acids. So you get an iso alpha acid percentage as well. So in the recipe development, all of the wet hop went into the whirlpool, but what I did is I did two separate calculations for one hop. So I calculated the whirlpool utilization on the alpha acids according to what my brewing system typically does. But then I also had to account for 100% utilization for the iso alpha acid. So I calculated two different calculations per hop to try and predict what we were going to get bitterness wise. That's how we approached the recipe. We definitely learned a couple of things through there. We had mashed very high to allow for hop creep, to try and get a higher finishing and gravity that we knew the enzymes in the hops would take down lower. And then post brew, realized that these hops are pasteurized, the enzymes are dead, you won't get hop creep. So last year's beer finished a little bit higher than this year's beer. We accounted for a little bit of bitterness uptake in the dry hopping because of that iso alpha acid. So when you're dry hopping with the wet hop, you need to understand that you are adding pre-isomerized bitterness as you do it, which is not traditional. So we kind of made our way through the recipe as we went along a little bit. Ryan and I were communicating back and forth throughout the dry hopping process. I was giving him feedback on what we were getting and so on and so forth. We added a small charge of Magnum, about 250 grams of Magnum last year, just to try and get the IBUs we were looking for. And we probably didn't need to do that in the end. So the learning curve was pretty steep. We made a really nice beer with what we had, but it was certainly nice to be able to discuss it again this year, knowing what we knew after that first brew, to kind of go ahead and approach the recipe from a different point of view.
Great. So Ryan, where'd you take it from on year two?
Yeah, so like Matt said, we kind of knew that like we weren't going to see any hop creep and how like the bitterness would transcribe into the final product. So we like knew that we probably didn't need any front side hops, so we removed the bittering hop charge. Kept the malt bill and the yeast pretty much the same. Didn't want to still wanted to make the hops shine, but still kind of keep it German at the same time. So yeah, we removed the front end hops, changed our mashing regime slightly. So knowing that we wanted it to finish a little drier, because Matt said we ended up finishing a little high last year because we weren't sure if we would hit any hop creep. So basically that's what we did, and kind of it went through the process and we got a lot drier final gravity. I think we increased the dry hop load a touch, just because we knew that like you still need quite a bit to come through the finished product. So we whirlpooled about a third of a kilo per hectoliter of the wet hops, and then in the dry hop we did about a kilo per hectoliter. And then still, what Matt said, we still, in retrospect, you still need to probably hit it quite a bit more than that if you really want the hops to really, really shine. So we did have to hit it just with a bit of pellets just to kind of brighten them up. But you still got that distinct floral, slightly vegetal wet hop character that you expect to find in wet hop beers. So that came through really, really nicely. But then this year's product, because of what we did with the bitterness, so it's quite a lot less bitter, a lot more dry. Could still probably use a touch more bitterness. Again, you might get there if you hit it with more dry hop, more of the wet hop dry hop. You might get your bitterness to quite probably dialed in rate. But all in all, I think we're like another step closer to where we want the final product. I think if we made it again, we'd probably get even a little closer, hopefully. But it's definitely an interesting beer in that sense, because there's a lot of learning and a lot of different things. So it's pretty interesting and seems pretty refreshing and enjoyable still. So
can you give us a reference? What was the targeted BU that you were aiming for on this one?
Because it was all
I think the discussion last year was moderately bitter.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Like a range is fine.
I think we were shooting for the 20s, like high 20s maybe.
High 20s, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're more like 20 maybe this year.
And I think last year we were closer to 40.
Yeah.
Okay. High 30s anyways.
So if I had to guess, I'd say we're sitting around 20 right now, give or take.
Yeah, and it's definitely a soft bitterness that at 20 that really melts well with
what's
the
nice.
malts.
I think it's because that German, like it's kind of when if you ever bitter with like traditional German hops, I always find the bitterness is nice and soft for the most part. That's one good thing about using this hop all the way through, is I think you still get that, like if you've ever bittered with like the really low alpha hops, I think you get the same nice bitterness out of it.
And then you both mentioned adding like a little bit of a pellet shot at the end of the dry hop just to bump up flavors. So can you tell us what the dry hop dosings were as a reference in the two versions?
Like I said,
like the wet hop or the pelletized?
The wet hop.
What did we do? We did 2 doses of I think we did 2 separate doses of 3/4 of a kilogram per hectoliter. If that makes sense. Does that make sense, Ryan? So it would have been 1.5 kilo. No, we did half a kilo per hec twice.
Okay, so 1 kilo per hec overall on the dry hops.
Overall, yeah.
So that's kind of where we hit. I just hit it 1 kilo per hec once, maybe slightly higher after it was all. And then, like I said, we hit it with some pellet just to brighten it afterwards. But
yeah, but you can definitely push that. Like if you look at what people are doing in New England, they're going to like 2 kilos per hec. So if you're willing to take the extract loss on it, you could push that to that limit as well.
You're not going to get a lot of extract loss. I mean, it's a very, very compact product. I think that expense and also just introducing vegetal matter may want you to pull back a little bit.
Yeah, I think
doing a New England IPA with this stuff, I would imagine it would probably taste like a bloody mess, but you know, I hope somebody tries it, really.
Nice.
Tooth and
So
nail.
that brings us to a good one of the questions in the chat is this a type of pellet? So can you guys just talk about just the texture consistency once you open the bag of the hops?
It's
like really wet. Like it is very like a high moisture content hop.
You can squeeze it.
And like it is juicy.
Oil so it's drip right out of your hand.
So it's juicier than any hop you'd probably come across in that sense. Like juicier than just like a hop off a vine even, right?
Yeah, I mean, Dan and I went to the farm itself where we got introduced to it, and we were given tins of samples, and when you open it up, it's very, very compact. You need a fork to like flake it out a little bit. And as you do that, there are like pools of hop oils and moisture in there. So they basically take the hop cone directly off the vine, within an hour or two, run it through a hammer mill straight into a bag, and then pasteurize it, and it's done. Like it's a very, very quick process. And I mean, what's in that bag is as fresh as you can do. I don't know the details of how much stem removal and things like that.
It looks pretty clean though. It looks mostly
it's very clean. Yeah.
Like it's somewhere between like a whole cone and like probably more towards a whole cone than like a hash, but it's broken down more than a whole cone, but not quite to a pulverized of like a hop hash or something.
Mm-hmm.
But still very moist. So that makes it much different than like a traditional dried pellet.
And did you see it breaking down or like falling into its little pieces as in dry hop, or did like that vegetal matter just stay together in a compact kind of?
It settles quite rapidly because of the moisture content. So
what we did last year was actually we broke it up before putting it in there, because as Ryan said, with that moisture content, if you were to open the bag and dump it into a tank, it's probably going to plummet in a ball right to the bottom. Like you need to allow it to expand or do it manually, really.
Okay. One of the other questions we've got in the chat is, what temperature do you two do the dry hops at? Now, what stage of fermentation / cold aging?
Well, I'll talk first about the first year, and then Ryan can say what they did. But we hit the first dry hop, so we pulled it out of the bags, broke it up into a sanitized bucket, dumped it in with 1 degree Plato left in the fermentation, and then did a second dry. So that would have been at about, I mean, I don't have my notes, but probably about 20 degrees. And then dropped the tank down to 17 after removal of the first set of hops and dumped in the second set.
Yeah, for ours was all at 16 degrees. So we did all secondary post-fermentation. And then it was sat on the hops for 4 days. And then I think I hit it at the pellets for another day or so. Wasn't too long, but so fairly short secondary dry hopping, and then crashed it out.
I don't know what Ryan's experience was. We didn't talk about it, but it's probably worth noting both of us added pellets to lift the aroma. I added 1 kilogram of Hallertau Blanc pellets to 1,750, 1,800 liters. So it's a very, very small amount. And to be quite honest, I felt like that pellet addition lifted the wet hop aromas a lot more. I wasn't getting a pelletized aroma from the dry hop. It was actually kind of just bringing out the other aromas. So if anybody tries that, I would really recommend going extremely light on that dry hop.
Yeah, I think we were 10 kilos in a 60 kilo batch or something. Like nothing too crazy, but just enough to brighten it up. Yeah.
Awesome. One more question that just popped up here. So is the extract loss comparable to a regular dry hop, or would you have seen an increase or decrease there? Because I know Matt touched on like it's a compact product, so just curious as to if we can somewhat give an idea to brewers what to expect.
Let me look at my. Believe it or not, I don't do the filtration or the brewing. I'd have to look at my notes here.
Yeah, no.
I mean, anecdotally, oh, go ahead.
It looks probably slightly better than normal. Probably because like we said, it settles very well. So I think your extract should be no worse than normal, if not maybe slightly better.
I think for us, we noticed it was quite a bit better of an extract. The one thing that Ryan and I noticed when we added the wet hop, this is the first time we ever used it, put it in the whirlpool. There's no expansion of the hops because they're soaking wet. So the hop doesn't expand and absorb all of that wort. And I know that we saw some yield decreases on the dry hopping, but in the whirlpool, like there was, I'd have to go back. I think we used 14 kilograms in the whirlpool, which is probably, I don't know, 25% more than I would put in pellets for my double IPA. Like it's a heavy load for my whirlpool. And yet there was like barely a hop cone in the bottom, because what you add is what you end up with. There's no expansion of that hop like a pellet would have. So on the kettle side, we had like almost no loss. On the dry hopping side, I mean, you combine that with yeast, things float around, it's not quite the same. But
I see someone ask if we bubbled CO2. Yeah, we rouse our hops.
yeah, we did too.
All right, I want to move a little bit towards, what this flavor contribution is and like how this impacted like sensory on your finished product. Can you guys talk about what at the brewery you perceived, versus what you see in an undried fresh hop beer versus what you see in a pellet brew that's a similar kind of profile as this beer?
I mean, I think it rivals any wet hop beer you would probably do locally, especially in like usage rate, maybe slightly better because of the greater concentrations of oils and flavor compounds that you get from the packaged wet hop. But it definitely leans more in that direction than like a pelletized version of a similar beer. If you were going to get the same results with a pelletized beer and flavor profile, you're probably looking at, I don't know, a third of the hop usage maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. I think the difference for me on this, like I'm actually, I'm generally not a huge fan of wet hop beers. For my palate, they come across very, sometimes astringent, but very, very tea-like an orange pico tea. I can taste a very leafy aspect that I enjoy a lot in whole cone hop beers, but it kind of amplifies it to the point where I don't love it. And I would probably attribute that to a lot of the vegetative matter that is actually being absorbed. Whereas with this product, I don't get that. I do find the aromas, the flavors, those, oil characteristics to come across as subtle and nuanced. But I think there's a great deal of complexity that lies within there. And I think that, playing around with this product to really push and stretch out what you can get out of it would be super fun. It's different. I mean, it's undeniably different. I mean, I know Hallertau Blanc very well in a pellet, and I can taste that in here, but there's something delicate about this that comes across as maybe a little more pungent on a pelletized side. And the Callista hops, to me, are outshined in this beer by the Blanc, but still kind of provide a little bit of that kind of stone fruit background I get. Whereas in pellets, I mean, pellets become a little more of an assault in flavor. And I don't mean assault in a negative way, obviously, but it's not, light and breezy.
Awesome. So talking about these flavors and how they develop. So have you kept any of these around and tasted them like after 6 months, after a year to see how it impacted shelf stability or just like general flavor intensity?
I mean, we had brewed this same time last year. We released it around last year this time.
Yeah.
We had a keg returned at the end of August. Due to the pandemic, they was still untapped, and they asked if they could return it. And it was a great customer, and we tried it. And although you could tell there was a change, it still actually tasted really quite fresh. I know that Dan from Brew Culture had tasted one a couple of weeks ago and said it kind of started to fall a bit. But I mean, for a craft brewed beer that's made at a brew pub and unpasteurized, aside from the wet hop and whatnot, it was pretty impressive. Like, we served the keg and our customers were thrilled that it was back on tap, and we drank it as brewers and we're totally happy with it.
Yeah, from my experience, I've made quite a few like locally made wet hop beers, and they tend to definitely show their signs of life by 3 or 4 months. They're usually trending downward. So hopefully there is something to these hops that have an extended shelf life, and help the wet hop beer age a little better. But from ours, I noticed they don't tend to age quite as well.
Awesome. A couple of technical questions still in the chat. So any issues with the heat exchangers post Whirlpool?
Like, this stuff settles so good that and like for us, it wasn't a big Whirlpool hop load, so it wasn't even. If you really wanted to push it, I don't know, it could be an interesting experiment, but
I mean, if you're
walks better than with the lack of absorption, you would have to use a lot probably, unless your system is a little messed up or something.
If I put 14 kilos of pellets in my Whirlpool, I would have an issue. But with this stuff, I got full yield out of there. It was no problem.
So do you have a reference point of just how much, what the dosage in a Whirlpool was? We're saying a little bit, like, what is it?
Mine was a kilo.
You were a
Mine
little
was a
higher.
kilo per heck almost.
Yeah, we saw less because of the bitterness, and we wanted to play it safe, so we were below 0.5 kilos a heck. But
okay.
I don't think you could, well, depending on your system, you could easily go much, much higher.
Awesome. All right. So I had a bigger question here from Alicia. So we talked about, this wet hop product in terms of like just, going to get that North American amplitude and style. And we're seeing that it kind of, it's not, with this experiment, we didn't quite get there. Maybe it's dosing, maybe it's, learning a new technique. But we did find a couple of cool things that this hops can do. Namely, we kind of just touched on, it can add some shelf stability to your flavor. So can you see this product being used as a complementary hop product to kind of amp up some of the characteristics of your traditional beers, whether it be a Pilsner or even in New England, like not as the main focus, but as another tool in a brewer's belt to achieve different things like haze and flavor stability?
I mean, it definitely be like for traditional styles for sure. Like I think it definitely has a place there. For New England, I think it'd be fun to mess around with. Like, obviously you need to, like, your usage rates are so much higher. But yeah, like you could definitely take your Hallertau Blanc wet hop and then split your usage with some pellets, and then probably pair it with another hop or two, and then kind of see if there's anything there, like how that affects anything. And I think if you most New England IPAs just kind of depend on how much hops you throw at it almost, but if you throw enough, I'm sure it'll be great.
Yeah, I mean, as far as splitting it goes, I mean, I don't think it would be the same effect as if you're using some T90s and some cryo hops. Those can create some pretty cool combinations. I'd almost just be concerned that the wet hop, it might get lost, you know, a little bit if you're using half and half. But I mean, until you try it, you really wouldn't know.
And then we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but when I talked to our friends in Germany, they mentioned that these hops are, because they're not dried, they're still very high in chlorophylls, and that kind of helps the haze stability. Did you guys end up filtering? Like I think Ryan, you mentioned you filtered this beer. Did you guys
I
see anything on that side of things in terms of
think it was
haze?
pretty, it's got like a bit of a haze to it. We run it through a centrifuge, and then we just have like a bag filter behind it just to catch any matter. But it acted normal. The haze looks stable. So there is definitely some haze that these hops can produce, that's for sure. So yeah, there might be something to creating haze stability there. That would be definitely, when you're going into New England, it could actually be a benefit there. So I could see that maybe being another reason to use it in your big IPAs. So yeah, it does show some, but handling through filtration was fine. Obviously, we didn't try to hard filter it, so I don't know if that would be any different than normal, but I don't think you did anything to yours, did you?
No, we didn't do anything. And I mean, as I don't really pay attention to it too much, but we poured it in August. It was still hazy. So.
Awesome. All right. So I'm going to, before I get into like the technical stuff about just the product, the pricing, the pack size, and that stuff, I want to ask you guys one last question. So just hearing, two brewers talk about this makes me want to, have some kind of brewing system to start, experimenting, because there's a million ideas spinning in my head. And I kind of want to know, where you want to take this next, where you see it really being advantageous, and what kind of beer styles are to improve what part of your process.
I think that my biggest hesitation would be to work with it in a big IPA. It would be fun. It'd be interesting. I'd be curious as to what would come out of that. But I mean, there's a lot of, more nuanced and layered flavors in this. I tend to think of like the hop usage of this particular product as a way to steer a beer into kind of a flavor component, as opposed to like dominate something. It can change the flavor of kind of an everyday drinking beer to something a little bit different. So I'd be looking, I think it'd be pretty cool to try, using it sparingly in something like a Kolsch. I really think there's probably a place for it on the tail end of a lot of Belgian beers. There's something about this that would really agree with those esters and that spicy note that comes from those yeasts. Like every time I drink Frisch, I think, wow, I'd like to try the same hops in a Belgian triple. And we tried one in Germany done with it, and it was really well done. I don't know.
To me, it just always screams like it's lame, but like table beers, and I love like leaf hop and table beers. Like, give me a 3% table beer, then I could take the leaf hop. This would probably do the same, but give you that wet hop character. And I mean, like in a hot summer day, you could drink a 3.5% one of those, like this flavor, all day long.
And I think it would give you substantial hop character in a beer like that too. That would be very unique and super balanced, really nice and pleasant. I agree.
I mean, there's nothing lame about that. I bet, 89% of the people in the chat feel the same way as brewers. And you touch on two highly marketable points, hoppy beers and low ABVs are a direction that the market is definitely taking. So as much as brewers love them now, we're seeing that trend a little bit beyond that. So that's, I wouldn't call that lame, not at all.
Yeah, I mean, you could totally hit it, like do a Euro quasi-Italian Pilsner thing out of it too, and it would probably be interesting. So, like,
I mean, from everything I've tasted, we've only worked with Frisch as an example, but there's something about the flavors that I get from these hops that would steer me away from using anything with too many crystal malts, too many caramel malts, too many dark malts. I think they're going to present themselves really, really well in beers that have got a light malt character. I mean, I think you could put it in a table beer. I think you could put it in a 10.5%, Belgian golden ale. But I think for me, the way that the flavors of these two particular hops come through, that, I haven't tasted the myriad of other wet hop that's available, but I would personally approach it from the point of view that you're probably gonna benefit from a light colored, crisp style.
Yeah, and that's where my head went right when we had the first discussion. I'm curious, and someone just said it in the chat as well. I'm curious to see where this would go in a, Brett beer, whether it's stainless or wine barreled. Like, I think it's going to have a lot of interesting characteristics that could kind of come out from there.
Oh, I think it could work really well with Brett.
Yeah, the right Brett strain, I think would work.
For sure.
The wrong one, maybe you'd pick up on the weird vegetal elements, but that's just Brett in general, I guess. But.
Yeah, you invite Brett to the party. You never know what's going to happen sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, no one's going to want to buy
it. Yeah. All right. Okay, so I've got, a couple of technical things to go over. If people have questions just for the two panelists, let me know in the chat section, and I'll get to them as I kind of wrap up the who, what, wheres of this hop. So I think the conversation really hit the point that I wanted to make. It's just giving brewers the opportunity to hear firsthand how this works and, quote unquote, in a beer made for science, just to get a better understanding of how to utilize these hops and what they provide in a, simple base beer. And it's a beautiful jumping board for, both brewers here, Ryan and Matt, as well as everybody in the chat room and in the webinar to kind of start experimenting with. So thanks a lot, Matt and Ryan, for, putting yourselves out there in the name of science and brewing a beer so that we could learn a little bit more about how the wet hops interact in a beer like this.
Yeah,
and
no problem.
Yeah, so we've got these on pre-order on the Brew Culture website. The average price that's going is between $14 and $15 a pound. Right now, we're going to have access to 8 varieties, and I'll just list them off here. I'm just going to get them here. We've got Ariana, Callista, Hallertau Blanc, Hallertau Traditional, Huell Melon, Mandarina Bavaria, Spalter Select, and Pearl. And we've got them on the pre-order. The plan is to get them in for end of May, early June. So if you're interested, that's the best route to kind of reserve the different kinds that you want. They come in 1 kilo bags, and it looks like you could be utilizing this from any, from your low end of the spectrum for hop utilization right up to ridiculous amounts. Talking to the German brewers, for the sake of doing it, they brewed a triple IPA that's 10%, and they dry hopped it with like 30 kilos in a 10 hect batch. So what happened, it was in process when we spoke to them, so I don't know. But the goal here was for to be able to experiment with that fresh hop flavor, and it's up to brewers to really figure out where it's going to work best and how to utilize it. And then if anybody really wants it ahead of, the pre-order, just contact your sales rep. There's myself in the East Coast. We've got Matt and Sean in Ontario, and then we got Ryan on the West Coast. And yeah, so if there are any other questions, I'm kind of looking on both sides here to try and not miss anything.
If you ever wanted to ask Tweedy anything.
We've got Alex Keller
There's
saying
a lot.
hi to Matt. He's in
Yeah, I
Winnipeg.
got that one.
Yeah, all right on.
Hey, Alex.
Awesome. So that pretty much wraps it up. I'm stoked to have everybody everybody on the panel. So we got another quick question here. We've got someone asking how long you two have been brewing professionally.
Ryan, since he was in diapers. I think I started professionally in 2009.
It was 05. Someone's trying to call me. 2005, I think I started. I mean, I don't brew anymore, but I brew.
Yeah, and for me, it's been 13 years that I've been brewing. So yeah, it's what I did right out of university, while in university. Shelf life question on the wet hop. So the shelf life when it's sealed is about 1.5 years, as I mentioned at the beginning. But once it's opened, you have to utilize the whole thing, is what I understood from our previous conversation, right?
I mean,
yeah, you need to move it quickly. It volatilizes very quickly.
So you wouldn't recommend keeping the bag in the fridge?
That was one fun part about because we're a larger brewery and they do come in the 1 kilo bag. So it was fun to dry hop with 1 kilo bags, but they do not.
When we were at the farm, we opened sample tins that were 2 and 3 years old. I know they give it 1.5 years, but I mean, even the 3-year-old samples, they smelled amazing. So I'm sure they're trying to be careful with the 1.5 years, but I would imagine you can get a bit better shelf life than that out of it.
And that's when it's sealed. But once it's open, we're kind of saying, get it in
there. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, that wraps it up. I think we've covered all the grounds of people with questions. So I think one more question here that just happened. Just dry hopping technique. So did you both do just load in from the top like a static dry hop, or did anybody do any recirc dry hopping methods?
Like, well, Matt
did a static.
But you did a primary dry hop though, so that would have been, because we did again.
So it would have recirculated itself. But we just go through the top.
Okay.
Same with us. So
awesome. Perfect. All right. Well, that wraps it up. Thank you very much. Everybody can get back to, on the West Coast here, it's almost 9. In Vancouver, they're just, starting their day probably. So yeah, thanks a lot everyone for joining. And if you have any questions, just reach out to the Brew Culture folks and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions or try and pull more information out of Matt and Ryan. All right.
Hey guys.
Bye everyone.
Thanks everyone.
Cheers.